Everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we're talking about transitioning into a new role during a really bad market. Maybe there's a layoff or a reorganization at your company. What do you do next? And I'm joined by Lord Crawford, who is a product manager at New York Times. And he's a good friend of mine. We actually know each other from college at Columbia University. And he has a very impressive background and has some experience that's going to be really helpful and relevant for this topic. So I was very excited to have him here. And just to give an intro of Lord and some of the things he's worked on previously, he studied computer science at Columbia University and was pretty involved on campus as part of Columbia's Organization for Rising Entrepreneurs, or CORE. And he had several different roles, such as committee leader, executive board member, as well as senior advisor. And I actually remember that was how I sort of started to learn about who you were, Lord, and get to see you around campus. And then from there on, he went on to work at Twitter as an associate product manager, and now is at New York Times as an associate product manager as well. So I think this is really going to be helpful for people who are similarly early in their careers as product managers or aspiring product managers who are looking to move into their next PM role. And we're going to really focus on what are some of the tasks you should take on when you're trying to transition or find a new role, as well as sharing some resources in the second half of this conversation that will help you land your new role. So I'm really excited to jump into this. I know this is going to be super valuable for a lot of people. So thanks so much, Lord, for joining us. And I'll pass it to you maybe to give us a little more context on some of the things I talked about. I would love to hear maybe from all of the experiences that I mentioned that you have. Is there anything that stands out as your favorite, or something that was super important to you or relevant that you want to share?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of good points in my background and just like time in college. I studied computer science out of a love for web design and just creating products that are accessible for everyone and have an impact on the world. And I think that translated into product management because I wanted a full view of the product lifecycle and to touch all these different parts like engineering, design, marketing, and see the launch from like 0 to 1. So I'm a product manager in advertising at the New York Times. I lead the ad experience for games and cooking. And something I love is that I honestly see the work I do on the train every day in New York. So some people, play Wordle or Connections on their commute every morning. And I'm proud to have worked on like those ad experiences that millions of people have seen.
That's so cool. Yeah, that must be like very, exciting to see those people on the train and using the apps that you're building. Do you ever feel like, hey, I want to go up to them and ask them for feedback? Is that part of your PM brain activating?
Yeah. I definitely, when I joined and I first saw it, I definitely at least wanted to talk to them and be like, hey, like, I'm curious, like, on your thoughts. How did like this change your experience, or like, how would you make it better? Like
Right.
your commute in the morning. But recently, I'm like, I don't know if when I talk to strangers in New York, always
Yeah, the New Yorkers don't want to be bothered on the train.
they
Uh,
don't.
No, that's cool. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I would love to transition this to focus a bit on, the topic for this video, which is transitioning into a new role during a bad market, whether it's a layoff or reorganization in your company, and you need to, move into a new role internally as well, which a lot of people are finding themselves in 2024 as well as 2023. So I'd love to hear like your tips on maybe some of the channels people should prioritize when they are looking for the next role.
I think it's an incredibly tough market. I think what we saw in like early 2023, that first half was like not a lot of companies or startups really hiring, like a lot of hiring freezes. I think what's happening now is like companies are hiring, but it's just like a really large influx of applicants. I definitely have experience like applying definitely during a tough market, that being 2023. And yeah, I want to share some tips on like how I navigated that. It definitely was like not a smooth journey, but
Right.
towards the end, I feel like I got a really good rhythm into applying, reaching out, and maintaining those connections for offers.
Yeah. And I think that's the first big one is, tapping into the network you have right away, and leveraging that because it is so hard, right? When you're competing against more senior people, when you're one of tens of thousands of applicants for some of these roles, even, it's much more easier to just leverage your network, look at your referrals if there's those opportunities. There's people in leadership roles that you've worked with previously, those kind of things. So I think maybe we can talk about that first step of reaching out to people in your network, people How do you do that? Is it via LinkedIn DMs? Is it through Slack channels? Maybe what are ways that have worked well for you?
Yeah, so at the company I was previously at, there's actually like a Slack channel set up for just previous current employees, a lot that were like, searching for a new role. And they even invited like industry leaders across their networks to come in and help, us find a new role. So I was really lucky to have that like actual virtual space to literally see like lists of job opportunities and like people to directly reach out to for referral. And I think there are a lot of them out on the internet. However, some things like this are kind of like who or just like seeing certain LinkedIn posts or certain like Reddit threads. So I definitely utilized that at first to reach out for like various like junior associate or like product manager one postings. And even for like mock interviews, a lot of people were offering time for that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say also LinkedIn. I utilized LinkedIn Premium. I know that it's like very costly now. I think they kind of raise it every month or every year, like adjust
Mm-hmm.
proficiency. But it was extremely helpful in like having unlimited messages to reach out to recruiters for roles that I needed. And I would also try to just find the hiring manager, so like the PM on the team. So say if I'm applying for a product manager role on the ad targeting team, like it's pretty easy to look up like product manager ad targeting at like said company, and then
Right.
either that will be the hiring manager or someone that's on the team that you're working with. So it's
Right.
always good to reach out to those people as well.
Yeah. That's LinkedIn is such a super powerful tool. And this is a question I get a lot: is in that outreach, what do you actually say? And I've shared templates and how to even directly ask for referrals if that's the approach you want to take. But for you, what was the thing that helped you get attention?
Yeah. I've actually seen your post on like what got you to refer someone at Google,
Right.
but my approach, sometimes like if it's someone that I feel like maybe not be as related, but could still be open to like 15 minutes of conversation, I send a quick note on like, hey, my name is Lord. Like I was like a PM at said company. This is why I think I'm good for the role. And do you have 15 minutes of your time to chat?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it was simple as that.
Yeah, and people see that your resume aligns with the role you're applying to, and your LinkedIn profile is up to date. They're more likely to actually say, "Hey, I'll give this person a chance." I can clearly see that they have the relevant experience for this role, and they're reaching out and telling me why they're a great fit. Maybe a value there is a lot of people might be reaching out, but their LinkedIn profile is just not really sharing what kind of PM responsibilities they've done previously, or maybe it's just like very high level. And someone who is trying to make a decision of like, all right, do I give this person a chance? It just makes their life a little bit easier if you already have a sort of a well put together profile, or if in your outreach you say specific things that are in the job description. Like it's sort of signaling that you know exactly what this role is about. When people reach out and they're just sort of like, hey, asking for time and not really showing that they understand what the role is about, you're like, hey, you haven't done the homework yet, right?
Yeah, I definitely list out like specific things that correlate exactly to the role and like also indicate like I've actually read into their background.
Mm.
And I'm interested in like hearing more about duties or accomplishments they've had. I
Mm.
also think maybe unique to me, and I know a few others that do this. I had a website set up. I still have a website set up,
Mhm.
and I'll send that like as a quick note at the end. And yeah, I've definitely gotten notes in the past about like, oh, like love like your background, love the website,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's like a lot more digestible sometimes than like listing out this is everything I've done like
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
message.
I love your website. That's one of the first things I noticed on your profile, and it stands out because not many people do it, first of all. So it's already unique. And then your website is also well done. It's very organized, and you can see, the different types of content organized. So I can like, hey, I want to look at like the side projects he's worked on, or launches he's done, things like that, and that helps. So yeah, if you don't have the best LinkedIn profile, and at least have some kind of website or platform that shows the person, the kind of work you've done. So I love that tip. Okay, cool. So I know we talked a little bit about how to reach out on LinkedIn, and these might be people who might not know who you are, and have a lot of influence on who gets hired. How about individuals that are already in your network? Previously, we talked about referrals.
Yeah.
How do you reach out to those people that are already in your network that you already know?
Yeah, I definitely started with people who I worked directly with in the past few years, whether that's like internships or like full time roles. Because those people know my exact like work ethic, and when they reach out to others, they can speak like from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes I just had really close people in my network who literally would tell me like, if you see anyone in my connections list, like let me know and I can try and make the connection if I'm like also in relative contact with them.
Right.
That doesn't always happen, but I think people are pretty receptive to it if like you've shown good work ethic in the past and you see someone in their network being like, oh hey, would you be open to connecting me to this person who I don't know, but like I know that you have contact with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think a lot of tech people will realize this like as they get further in their career, but it's always useful to talk to everyone at your company because you never know where they're going to end up afterwards. That in turn also means like where you can be referred to or just like learn more about roles in other companies.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely helped that people in my personal network eventually were at companies that like I wanted to get a job at.
Generally, from all of these channels, is there one maybe really important lesson you learned in trying to find that next role through referrals, from close relationships, or even strangers on LinkedIn? It's like, what's the big takeaway you think?
Yeah, I think I've talked to a lot of friends about this, but I actually made a post on LinkedIn about like, hey, I'm looking for a new role and like this is my experience. Would really love if like any opportunities that you came across product related. Um, and I definitely like didn't do that at first because I was scared of the perception and
Mm-hmm.
just admitting that like I was having a difficult time essentially finding a role.
Right.
But that message is like to go say like if you really want something, like you have to go for it and make that really known because the more you speak it into existence, you'll get closer to what you're like looking for, and people will see that. Posting things in that nature are similar, and like reaching out and being very clear about what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And even people in your close network being honest about like, oh, it's a difficult market. Like, I'd love any tips or advice you'd have.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I think it's really challenging to make that post on LinkedIn, like you said. And I feel like from my friendships and having conversations with other PMs in tech, a lot of us do go through layoffs. And I think a lot of people sort of dealt with it in private and try to like leverage their internal networks and figure it out. But it's just so refreshing when you talk to people and you realize like a lot of us are going through the same thing, and it's okay. Like, we just got to help each other out through the process. And it feels a little bit less of a burden, and you don't have to be alone in this. So I appreciate you doing that, and hopefully it encourages more people to do similar things if they're in a situation where they actually do need help to find the next role.
Yeah, because what's the worst that could happen? Like,
Yeah.
everyone knows that like you're unemployed and trying to find a job. But what actually happens is that people close in your network who you worked with in the past or have heard about your work like start reaching out to you,
Mm.
being like, hey, like I'm happy to help, or like, hey, I actually know about this like role, or like, hey, this person hasn't actually posted this, but just keep your eye out.
The alternative is you're sort of waiting for months and months for something to happen, and then it becomes a bigger problem, right? Like then you have sort of a bigger gap on your resume, for example, like that might actually hurt you in the longer run. Whereas if you just reconnect with people and figure out, what's the role in 1 to 2 months, then you just built better relationships and got a role. And all you have to do is make a LinkedIn post, which is tough, but you just got to go for it, right?
Another really useful piece of my network that I utilized was venture capital connections. So I was really fortunate enough to have gained that piece throughout college, and just being involved in like a lot of entrepreneurship communities. And there's actual like scouts at these VC firms that are looking for like high potential product individuals to place in startups or like um, small to mid-sized companies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and people not even with those connections can reach out to these scouts and ask like if there's startups in their portfolio looking for people of like their background. And
Mm-hmm.
that's literally their job, to match candidates like to the right startups in their portfolio.
That's a good way to know what's out there, because that might not be publicly shared or on LinkedIn or something. But if you reach directly to those individuals, you could probably figure out what job listings are available. So I feel like we've talked a lot about how to reach out to people, but once you get that first round interview, a screening call, then you got to start preparing, right? Actually, like going into PM interview mode and preparing, whether it's through mocks, reading some resources. So I know there's a couple items that you want to highlight as helpful that you actually leveraged in your prep. So at a high level, do you want to give us like those 3 or 4 things that you want to call out?
Yeah, I think something that I utilized heavily was Exponent. I first started out with that via like the YouTube channel, just like reviewing all of their like mock interviews and tips that like people would give post mock interview.
Yeah.
I think that was extremely helpful because everyone's style of interviewing and doing these case studies is different, but you can pull something from each one.
Yeah.
Apply to yours, like, oh, hey, this person like takes pauses and like asks for feedback in this way, or
Right.
hey, this person like always reflects at the end and says like, oh, what would they do differently, or like um, what metrics they would track to maintain the product moving forward. And then you start just building on these little things from those YouTube videos you've seen and put it into your structure.
Right. Right. I love that. I definitely want to dive deep into that one. And then this second item is maybe cracking the PM interview, which is a book that a lot of people know about.
Yeah, so I read that honestly like in the beginning of my like wanting to become a PM. I first started out honestly applying to PM internships. That's how I became like into the full-time role
Mhm.
during college. And I read that just to understand like the landscape of like how did the product manager role come to be and like what is the foundation of this. I
Mhm.
think that book does a really good job. And I think the questions in the book like are also a good starting point. Um, and just it gives a great structure. I think past that is really just like practice and working with like peers or like online to refine your interviewing style.
Okay, awesome. And another resource that you were calling out before we jumped on this call was Angel Anua's Medium blog post about the Google Associate PM interview, the APM interview, and how to crack that. So, how helpful was that?
Yeah, I think honestly before reading that, I had a lot of misconceptions about the role and just like what even the Google APM program is. That one is correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like the first major one, and then a lot of other tech companies like followed that model. Um,
Right.
so it broke a lot of misconceptions around what I had in that APM program, as well as like how other people were preparing for it. I kind of realized that I needed to up my game and um, shift more towards like practicing instead of like reading about product management and like
Hmm.
doing more of the networking. Like I needed to actually like improve my product craft. Um,
Hmm.
and he also mentions a lot of like mock interviews and like just preparing like a structure beforehand.
Yeah, I love that. That was the biggest takeaway for me in preparing for Google's PM interview process as well, is you can only read so much about how to do it, what it means to be a great PM, even all the YouTube videos on here that we watch that are like more philosophical and high level. But then when you sit down and, do a mock interview or practice over and over, then you become, better not only interviewing, just being a better PM, because you create like an approach of how to tackle big problems and break things down. And like you said earlier, when you watch so many videos, you start taking the best practices from that. And then when you practice it, it becomes more realistic. And then you see yourself being able to answer questions that you have never heard of. And you're like, oh, I have some kind of approach. Yeah. So that one's really interesting. So with those three, I guess we can go back to the first one, because this is the resource I actually went to first, which is the Exponent YouTube videos. Exponent has, you know, dozens of YouTube videos. These are mock interviews with current PMs from across the big tech space. And you get to actually watch people in real time, like answer questions that they hadn't previously heard about, and see how they tackle it. And I found it really helpful. So I would love to hear, what were like the biggest learnings that you got from watching those?
Yeah, I actually purchased like a subscription for like a hot second to Excellent when I was in the thick of finding a new role. And yeah, I think it was extremely helpful for like getting questions that were updated in terms of like what people were asking in PM interviews like 2023, 2024. I think for a while I wasn't going over like the reflection piece of like after I design like a product solution, I say like what metrics I'm going to track. Like I'm not like, oh, this is what I would do in the future, like phase 2, phase 3 approach.
Right.
So that's just one example of like something I was missing, but I'm sure in viewing other interview styles, like you'll see like, oh, I don't do this thing that I feel like could be really helpful for me.
Yeah.
I think it's just helpful to see like people's mannerisms and like how they ask for breaks. Like I said, I was definitely one to like really ramble on during interviews at first, but I noticed that it's really acceptable and honestly gives both interviewer and interviewee like a chance to like breathe.
Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned you actually signed up for Exponent, in addition to getting all the free YouTube content that you're looking at. So, what is the big difference between watching like the free content, which I actually did for a lot of my interviews, and then actually signing up for the product management course and paying for Exponent?
Yeah, so I think in the videos it's kind of like a lot of one-off. You just get a selected bank on like which questions you can see, but on when you actually pay for it, you get like, I don't say it's not unlimited, obviously, but it's like a large slew of questions that you have access to. And you'll see by doing mock interviews, if you do enough, you'll kind of run out of things to ask about, or you'll
Right.
like have seen a lot of questions.
Right.
That's one thing, as well as like just like articles and like good structure, good tips. Yeah, I didn't pay for it for a long time, but I used it for a specific like month where I really wanted to like lock in on interview practice.
I did the same exact thing. I think I paid for like 2 months of subscription. All right. So going into the second resource that you found really useful, we're going to talk about cracking the PM interview. So why was this helpful, and how did you use it to actually get ready for interviews?
Yeah, so I read this book years ago. I think prior to reading it, I didn't really understand like what a PM was. I saw it in practice like by people older than me, but I wasn't really sure like what product craft or like sense was, and how this role was actually like founded, and why it existed. So that book was really good on like understanding that at first. And then there's a transition in the book where it gets into like how do you become a PM? It really connected the dots between like why are they asking these questions in the interview, and like why is that important for becoming a PM? Yeah, I think the book is really well written to understand like how to become a product manager.
Yeah.
And then you have to take it further than that to like prep for interviews.
So it sounds like it's like one of the first things people should look at, even if they're maybe like an aspiring PM, just to learn about the role, figure out if it's a good fit, and then get some early prep for interviews.
Yeah, a lot of people may be unclear on like why these questions are asked in the interviews. Like, oh, why do I know how to optimize like Airbnb subscription model? But these are just real questions that you'll be asked on a daily basis as a PM, and
Right.
the book just offers like a foundation for like how to think.
Right.
Right.
Awesome. Honestly, like interview prep is like some of the most learning that I do in my PM career. It's so funny. Like
Yeah.
in the day to day of working as a PM, I can go on sort of several months where I'm doing some repetitive tasks and I'm just doing my job. But when you're interview prepping, you go back to the fundamentals of like product design, analytics, being technical, and then you start to ground yourself on like the basic approaches you should take to solve problems. And it's so helpful. And in our day to day, we can sort of get locked in on just tasks and accomplishing things, and then you don't take like a step back to realize like why do I do these things, and like why should I approach these problems in an organized way. Even the interviews where I didn't get the offer, I felt like I learned a lot, and then I would go back to my current role and like use it.
There's some good product leaders who like still are very organized, like in the way they think and like applying different approaches, like whether that's like metric based or like user interviews. And then you'll start to understand, like as a PM, maybe you'll lean into one over the other. But yeah, it was super helpful to like just see how PMs think. And then honestly, during that time, I started even analyzing apps I was using like on a daily basis and just seeing products completely different when I was outside.
That's dope. That's dope. Yeah, I feel like we could talk all day about all the apps how we look at apps differently now that we have like the PM view. Um, so the last one we want to talk about is the Medium blog post we covered a little bit about on the APM side and how to prepare for the APM. I think the key takeaway in this blog that you shared earlier is that repetition and having high volume of practice is really the key, and that just reading about the types of PM interviews out there can only take you so far. So I wonder what you took away from having done so many practice questions, and maybe there's a specific number or threshold you recommend. Maybe it's like 20 or 50 per type of question, but after doing so many, what did you take away from it?
Yeah. So I think, first what I noticed is that I wasn't doing enough interview prep, and that was the thing that I was missing. And then once I started getting into a good group of like having friends to do mock interviews with, I noticed that all the time I'm going to be throwing questions that I may not have the domain knowledge on. So say for instance, like the food industry, I don't have as much knowledge on that, but I should still know how to answer questions, product or like analytical related about it. And just having a template that keeps me structured regardless of what problems are thrown at me. Because you notice as a PM, like you'll always have to think about the users, what needs they have, what metrics you use to evaluate, like if you actually solve that problem. There's certain things that you always have to think about that can be applied to any industry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And yeah, we'll probably add the link to that blog in the description for people who want to read it, and let us know what you guys think. What was that?
Shout out Angel.
Yeah, shout out to Angel for writing a great blog and helping more aspiring PMs crack the interview to the Google APM program. Cool. Awesome. So I feel like we covered a lot of the key things. We covered, what do you do to reach out to your network, whether it's, close relationships or strangers on LinkedIn. We talked about all the resources that you leverage. So if there are any general tips that you would like to share for people who are actually going into interviews and things that you think are important, we can share that now.
So historically, like I'm not always the biggest writer, but I found it extremely useful to write out like the behavioral question. Everyone like will have like some sort of elevator pitch, like who are you? Everyone will probably ask like, oh, what's your favorite product, or like what products are you using? Or they'll definitely ask like, why are you interested in the PM role? Those type of questions you can kind of guess will come up. It was really useful for me to write that out, practice it with even friends, and get into a groove of like being able to tell my story and like why I love product, what I love about product.
So writing helps you just solidify what you're going to say, and it makes it feel more tangible when you write it down.
Exactly. Because there's always topics that will come up. You can't always do this for like, the product design questions or like the analytical questions, like guessing exactly which they're going to ask, but
right,
you can. And then I think as well, like studying the company really helps. You'll be able to think of product solutions that maybe the interviewer hasn't even thought of, and then that will definitely get you extra points. Or just like knowing a lot about the company to the extent that they also do will
Right.
100% make them believe that you can do the role. Um,
Right.
and then lastly, like I think regardless of how the interview went, well, definitely, especially if I don't get the role, I always ask for feedback via email. Like, what are things that I could have done better, or like would put me at the next level?
Yeah, that's so important. And I've been in interview situations where by the end of it, you sort of know what part of the interviews you struggled with. And that's important because you can follow up with the next interview and just re-emphasize like your prep on that section, just to remind yourself. For me, there was an interview I failed because my estimation section just went horribly. Where I answered the question, I got to a number where I was like overly confident. I didn't take time to reassess and see if there was like a gut check of like how accurate this number was, and the interviewer pretty much was like, "Are you sure?" And I could tell that he knew that I didn't answer it in a way that I should have, and ultimately it wasn't how close I was. It was more of like, did I take the time to reassess my answer? And so I went into the next interview with that in mind and just thinking like, okay, that was something I have to do next time.
Yeah.
So um, that's important because sometimes people don't tell you their feedback, so it's on us to like figure it out ourselves sometimes. But super super important tip. I love that one.
Yeah. And I guess super side note, but it's definitely more about the way you think than the solution. And I learned that like midway as well.
Right, right. Okay. Awesome. No, this is really helpful. Lord, thanks so much for joining my channel and just like being a great friend and supporting other aspiring product managers. So thanks for taking time, and I hope to have you back someday as well. And if people have questions, where should they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me even via email, Lord Crawford 2 at Gmail, or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll drop the LinkedIn in the description as well. And thank you so much for all the tips, and we'll see you around.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
See ya.